The New World Order has a very specific plan, and that is to institute a new monetary system. But at some point in the near future, we are going to experience a global economic collapse. At this point, we will have the supranational entities like the UN and the IMF and the World Bank and all the big boys basically gathered together, and they have an emergency meeting to discuss how they are going to save the world from this global economic collapse that is occurring.
70% of all gold production in the U.S. comes from a single state, Nevada. Conventional wisdom says that all the good deposits have been found. But one geologist who's discovered more than 30 million ounces of gold says he knows where to find Nevada's missing gold. And right now, he may be on the verge of being proven right. Investors and speculators can learn more at crushthestreet.com/gold.
Hello, everyone, and welcome in to crushthestreet.com. We got a returning guest. His name is David Quintieri of the Money GPS. You can find him on YouTube. He's an author. His website is themoneygps.com. David Quintieri, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me on.
David, we've seen some pretty crazy things happen in the markets. Just starting in the Baltic Dry Index, we're hitting new lows as we speak today. New lows. I feel like I'm saying that every week lately. What have you been seeing currently in the markets, and what are your thoughts right now going forward here in 2016?
The Baltic Dry Index is definitely one of the most important indicators to look at. You can also use that plus imports and exports for the various major countries around the world to sort of have a correlation with that. But just looking at the Baltic Dry Index, as you mentioned, we are seeing new lows, and that continuously happens because this is a downward spiral. Many of the people on the inside in the industry are quite aware of what's happening here, and they're essentially coming forward and speaking about it, saying that, this economy is dying, and they're not afraid to say so. So what I have seen is basically what everyone else has seen, and that is it's a global crash that's occurring at this time, all simultaneously. Historically, you would have times when one country or one part of the world will be suffering, and that would have an effect on the remainder of the economies around the world. But today, when one major country gets a downturn, then everybody turns down along with it. So,
David, is this something that is controlled? Do you think this is a controlled collapse, or is this something that is happening because things are coming unglued and we're kind of losing control of the situation?
In a sense, it depends on what level you look at, really, because when we see the bankers and how they have such control over the politicians, how they are former bankers themselves, the alumni of the major corporations like Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, we understand that there's collusion there. I think that's pretty standard for most people. So their ability to construct a crash or a boom, for that matter, is not only possible, it's likely, and we see that every day. If you look at the hockey stick type patterns that occur all the time in the stock charts, you can see that for yourself. This is obviously computer algorithms which have taken over in the high frequency trading. But at the same time, they've instituted these computer algorithms, and like the flash crash that we saw only a few years ago, they may not be able to control it at some point. So I do believe it's a little bit of both in this way.
It is impressive when we do see the stock markets, in this year, move and they sell off really hard. But then right at the end of the day, we see that bid come in, and it seems like it comes in out of nowhere. I'm not sure if you've looked into that much. Any thoughts on, and you mentioned high frequency trading, any thoughts on what that might be?
For sure. We always see the pickup at the end of the day, and that is the plunge protection team coming in to rescue the stock market. And they do so because when you have the following market opens for the, let's say if it's a crash that occurs in the US, for example, then the other countries, in Europe and towards Asia, they have their own stock markets, and that has to be a concern for their markets as well. So we always have this cycle that appears that they want to look good for the next trading day, and ultimately it's a chain reaction that occurs because their stock markets are open 24 hours a day, but we have to figure that as I said, a chain reaction occurring, one market to the next market to the next market, and they want to look pretty before the end of the day so that they can not have a snowball effect, because that's usually how it happens. It overreacts, and we have the snowball effect, and it keeps picking up and picking up. So that if they can get it up before the end of the day, at least to, maybe not to where it was at the beginning of the day, but not as bad, then they can, save face a little bit.
We're seeing these massive drops down as of lately, but we're not seeing that same sort of spike upwards. I mean, even today, it was up a little bit, but it hasn't gone up 400, 500 points the way we've seen it going down. I mean, the momentum, the trajectory of the direction of the way the market wants to go is down, and it's having a really hard time going back up, and I think they're going to have a hard time controlling it and keeping it in the green here in 2016. David, have you, I know you have been following crude oil. We're over $30 right now, roughly $33. Is oil being controlled in the same manner as gold and precious metals?
The short answer is yes. Just basically, if we've seen the price of oil change so dramatically over these past few years, if you look at it from, I believe it's about mid-2014, where it was over $100 a barrel, and then it makes its way down below $30 a barrel. I think it was around 27 or so. And that's obviously a dramatic downward spiral we've seen in a relatively short period of time. Now, the question is, does it deserve to be near $30 a barrel? Is that its real price? Or does it deserve to be near $100 a barrel? Or is it somewhere in between? Many people have their own reasons to believe, one way or the other. What I would like to suggest is that the price is decided not by supply and demand. And this is clearly illustrated with this most recent crash in the prices, where if you have a glut in oil, that glut does not appear overnight. So the prices don't fall this far, this fast in such a short period of time. That's not why. It's all about the financial side of things. Remember, this isn't oil itself. You're talking about contracts and futures and paper, essentially. And what we have here is a manipulation. It's just corporations trying to make money off of whether it's a rise in oil or whether it's a crash in oil. It goes too high to begin with, and then when it starts coming down, it goes too low to end off. And the cycle just keeps on repeating.
Dave, could we see oil hit potentially in the teens? As low as $10. Any thoughts on how far oil can go in this bear market trend that we're seeing it in?
I've heard Mike Maloney talk about $10 oil. I've heard British Petroleum, I believe as a CEO, he said, it's definitely possible to see $10 oil. I'm not saying it's going to be $10 oil, but really there's no bottom to where it can go. It will come up from that point, surely, because it always, like I said, overreacts and goes too far. So, where it all ends up, that will remain to be seen. But there's no real bottom to the price. I don't want to give a number necessarily, but $27, I think, I think it could go definitely lower than that, especially when we struggle to really see any new additional QE, because of course there's no real market anymore. It's really just QE. So without that QE coming online, everything's going to enter into a state of deflation.
Well, and the truth is governments want higher oil prices. It doesn't benefit them. And in like gold is a competitor of fiat currencies. Oil is a commodity that the governments benefit from when the price is higher. I mean, a lot of countries are dependent on oil as their export. So it does make sense that oil has the upward potential to go higher, especially as the agenda lines itself up in that manner. David, when it comes to what the elites are planning, I mean, the definition of the New World Order can be very broad. And I just want to get your thoughts on what is the New World Order. What do you see as the agenda for the people in power with the current circumstances? I mean, specifically on the economic side. Let's not even, or maybe it does go into geopolitical, but let's talk economic. I mean, what are your thoughts when it comes to this?
Well, the New World Order has a very specific plan, and that is to institute a new monetary system. I'm not talking about a new currency. I'm not talking about a one world currency. Not necessarily. It could end up in that direction. But you definitely would have to agree, I'm sure anyone would who's studied this before, is that every so often there's a new currency. We've all heard this before. Now, a currency system or monetary system. Now, what I would suggest is going to happen is that at some point, perhaps not the crash that we're about to face right now, but at some point in the near future, we are going to experience a global economic collapse. At this point, we will have the supranational entities like could be the UN and the IMF and the World Bank and all the big boys basically gathered together, and they have an emergency meeting to discuss how they are going to save the world from this global economic collapse that is occurring. Of course, this is all pre-planned and decided in advance, and the solution to all of this that they'll provide is a new currency system, a new monetary system, which will be in the background, invisible to you and I, because we'll probably still be using our Visa cards and our Canadian and American currencies and the euro and everything. But behind that lies a new currency. Perhaps it'll be the IMF's SDR, anything. It could be a basket of currencies. And essentially that's where they're going. I do believe that is absolutely what they want, to have a supranational entity, to have the say in what currencies are valued at, and therefore what commodities are valued at, what stocks and everything that's no longer priced in US dollars, but priced in what they decide at any given time.
David, we're they're doing the Republican debate tonight, and Trump is kind of like that outside candidate for the Republican Party, and you got Bernie Sanders on the Democrat side, who's kind of outside the establishment status quo. Is it possible? And don't let me sound like I don't want to sound like I'm just endorsing Trump, but is it possible that he's outside of the agenda of the elites who want to control? I mean, we've seen what he did, tonight, stepping out of the debate. Is someone like him able to stand up and do what's right for the world, the people? Is there any hope in terms of a leader that can go up against the New World Order agenda?
Truthfully, I don't think that he's viable in that way. But I mean, if you want to compare him to Hillary Clinton or Obama or anybody else, if you're playing lesser of two evils, then perhaps. But what I would say is that the establishment doesn't like him. And in that, we should take a clue from that, because generally that's the way you see it. You saw with Ron Paul and even Rand Paul, the establishment doesn't like them, so they tend to really push them down and give them less time on the air. And, we've seen all the scams taking place before. And Trump has a little bit of that as well, though the media does certainly follow him because of the the things that he's said publicly. What I would say is that he definitely could win as the candidate on the Republican side, but I believe that it's really being set up to lose ultimately. We will only have leaders that are puppets. There's never going to be a time that I can foresee in the future where we have a real leader. And that goes for any country around the world. So anybody who thinks that, they will get the person that they choose, they voted for example, they voted for Obama got in. No, you didn't vote for Obama really, because it's all fraud anyway. They're not counting your vote. Your vote is not counted. They appoint somebody. When they give you two choices, let's say Romney and Obama, they were giving you two heads of the same snake, essentially. And it just goes to show you how people can be fooled, because unfortunately they're looking for an answer. They're looking for change, as Obama, really liked to harp on. I don't think any candidate up there will have any chance, realistically.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see them fighting and not wanting a guy like Trump to get up there, because he does question and kind of competes with the status quo. For me, it's like the Super Bowl. I enjoy watching what goes on in politics, and what he did, this risk he took by not participating in the debate and running a competing televised program. To me, I'm very curious to see if he's actually going to take off in the eyes of the voters, because it is a risk to kind of do that. But at the same time, that's exactly what a lot of Americans want. They're tired of the establishment. They're tired of the same old, same old. And Trump is kind of providing that answer to the frustration that a lot of Americans are feeling. And the same thing goes for a guy like Bernie Sanders, who is appealing to, he's talking about the fraud with the big banks. He's talking about the fraud in politics. But the problem is his answer is huge government. And that's the disconnect. I mean, he's saying a lot of the things that, especially guys like us that, watch and listen and pay attention, that we know is happening, but his solution is like the complete wrong answer. So I'm very curious, to say the least, to see what is going to happen here in 2016. And just to end on this, so any thoughts on who will likely be the president of the United States here in 2016?
Wow, that's a difficult one, certainly. If Hillary Clinton doesn't get into big trouble with the whole email scandal and everything else she's involved in, all the criminality, then I actually do see it as being a possibility that Hillary Clinton will be the number one. But I'm not going to be able to put my finger on it right away. I think we should wait to see who gets chosen for the Republicans and decide from there. I think Trump can certainly win on the Republican side. He's definitely has a lot of traction behind him, but I don't know if he will be put in as the president just simply because they're chosen. They're not really. There's no real vote.
Okay, so we got $30 trillion estimated in 10 years as far as our national debt, and we know this is unsustainable. Do you see this as likely? Do you see this being forgiven in some sort of debt jubilee, world currency? What are your thoughts on how they're going to manage this massive, unsustainable debt that we have growing?
Part of what they'll do, and there's going to be a lot in what they do, basically at some point, these countries have to claim not bankruptcy, but they'll term it something else. It doesn't matter, but really it's bankruptcy. And they're going to go in and dip their hands into the bank accounts of you and I, and they will go in take a percentage from everybody. They'll do so starting with, for example, accounts that are uninsured. So if you have over $100,000 in the account, they're going to take 5%, let's say. And the average middle class person who doesn't have $100,000 in the account, they're not going to be upset. So then they'll do this in increments and slow and steady increases, and slowly it will appear that more and more people are getting money taken away from their accounts. They will also institute, or they could institute, where your 401k or RRSPs or the supers or whatever, depending on where you live, your retirement accounts essentially will be, I term this as confiscated, but they do so giving you a government bond dated further into the future. So they say, we haven't taken your money at all. What we've done here is simply deferred it. You can't have it now, or you can have a small percentage every year. They'll come up with some scheme, but ultimately locking you out of your money. That's your savings. You personally have it, but it's in the banking system. Therefore, it belongs to the big boys, the technocratic elite. So they're going to take it in this way, and that is going to be the way that they promise will fund their schemes. And ultimately, this could connect in with the whole new monetary system in that too. So they can say, look, we'll institute this new monetary system. It's going to be backed by the IMF. They're going to bail us out, even though they're made up of all the countries that will be doing the whole bailing out. But anyway, that could all be interconnected.
Dave, are they going to lock everyone in to the banking system by transitioning to a cashless society? Will that be the first step to actually being able to control our money, and then from that point be able to confiscate it?
I don't know if it'll be necessarily the first step, but it is an absolutely crucial step. The cashless society is one of their major goals that they've been working on pretty hard. There is a lot of cash in circulation now, especially in Europe. That number has increased over the last 10 years steadily, year over year. But ultimately, it's where they're going. And there is good reason for there being no cash. I can understand it. It is much more convenient not to have to carry the bills and the coins. This is a natural evolution where we've had, trading livestock and crops and everything else. Today, you have a digital forms and it is easier, but the inability to transact in cash is where we have a problem. So if two people, you and I, want to transact between each other, we can no longer do that trade without some sort of, let's call it, interference. So that's something that I really dislike, and a lot of people do too. So they're hoarding cash. You can see that, like I said, with the statistics out of Europe, clearly some people don't want to give it up. Ultimately, they can issue a new currency. It could still be called US dollars, but say, the old currency is garbage. You have to return your new currency and you get it back in digital form, and they have ways to do this forcefully.
It could be done in a blink of an eye. Yeah. So your thoughts on gold? I mean, this week we saw 520 to 1 on the COMEX registered to actual physical ounces. Paper claims to actual physical ounces. What are your thoughts on precious metals right now here in 2016?
What I would say is that precious metals are ultimately a very, very good, in fact, probably store of value over long periods of time. The number, though, this is what a lot of people don't like to hear. It's unpopular to say so, but I have to say it because this is what I believe is the truth. The number that you see, whether it's, let's say, a gold at $1,000, people believe that if you see gold at $1,000, that's what it's worth at this time. But that's not the case. That's paper, precious metals, or gold. And to try and decide what it's worth in a dollar value, I mean, you're talking about a manipulated currency. If the currency actually factored in for inflation and everything else along with that, there would be different numbers. I look at it a totally different way. Precious metals are valuable. They store value over time. My intention with them is not to necessarily make a profit with, it's to store value. It's to take savings and pass that on through generation to generation. That's the way I look at it. So therefore, I believe that gold is a good investment. Precious metals, in fact, are a good investment. Where they will head in 2016, nobody knows. I really have no idea. I mean, they've been trading in a frame, let's call it, for quite a period of time. They've been fluctuating back and forth, no different than the stock market. It's been really volatile up and down, but ultimately where it heads, I'm not sure. It should be much higher, I can tell you that right now, but we're playing with manipulated markets. We know, like you said, the paper to actual physical metal ratio is ridiculous, and I think that's just going to continue to get worse.
Dave, so in conclusion, and I'm going to just ask you this, again, it's a prediction. No one really knows what is going to happen, but do you think if the markets are continuing to move the way they have been, we will see the Fed raise rates coming up in March?
I don't foresee a rate rise in March at all. I don't know how they would ever do that. I mean, they certainly could, but I don't think that will have any positive effect. I believe that the markets want a rate decrease, if anything else, at this point. They want some QE, more like it. But March, I'm not seeing a rate rise at all, unless something changes.
Yeah, and we had such an immediate response from the markets when we saw that 25 basis point rate hike. It's hard to say that it was directly because of the rate hike, but it's just too coincidental, I'll call it that we started seeing a lot of volatility in the stock market, especially, starting day one in January 2016. January 4th was the first trading day. So, Dave, any last thoughts before we let you go here?
I guess I'll just say that you need to keep an eye on as many of the indicators as you possibly can. Like I said, if you're looking at the Baltic Dry Index, don't use just the Baltic Dry Index. Use all of the shipping type indexes, and then you correlate that to any particular country's imports and exports. You can see that data, and you should be able to find it easily throughout a search engine. But look at what I'm trying to get to is look at one particular indicator and then look at which corresponds to that. For example, you wouldn't look at just the S&P 500 to see how the US stock markets are doing. You want to see all of those stock markets, and what about the ones in North America and everything else? So do not just looking at one or two indicators, one or two charts. Look at as many as you possibly can. A lot of people look at 50-day moving averages and 200-day moving averages, and I've seen this many times before, that people literally use these two things to determine if a stock should be invested in or not. And literally nothing else, not the fundamentals of the company, nothing else. They just use two indicators, and this is what we have. This is the kind of thing that's running these markets. You have no fundamental analysis whatsoever, I guess because the fundamentals have been thrown out a long time ago.
People don't want to believe that things aren't on the up and up. They want to believe that, what's that word? That normalcy bias. Everything is normal. Everything is fine. The 401k plan is intact. Social Security is intact. The government is good. And they don't want to believe the truth that guys like you are uncovering. So everyone, that is David Quintieri. He's with the Money GPS. David, thanks so much for coming on the show with me today.
Thank you for having me on.